Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Friday to each of you. We're just giving it a minute or two for all of our guests to join our VodCast community. We're so delighted to have you here today. We know that you could spend this hour doing a number of things, but the fact that you are joining us today, we're really grateful for that. We do promise to deliver a rich conversation with the phenomenal guest co-host that I cannot wait to introduce you to. Let us know in the chat where you're joining the conversation from. It's always a treat for us to know where people are joining from. And we find that we have folks from all over, even some that join us from some global markets. And we are always really excited about that. For those who are joining us for the first time, I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I serve as the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. And I want to shout out my amazing team that's here with me to help ensure this virtual experience is one that is optimized for you. I also want to let you know that we have closed caption available. That's our way at NWC and showing up for disability inclusion. And so if that's something that's of use to you, I want to make sure that you're aware that's available to you. Cameras today are encouraged, but they're certainly not required. It's a great way for us to get proximate to each other. If you don't mind having those cameras on, we do love to see smiling faces, but we also recognize that many of you are joining just an auditory observatory capacity, and we welcome you nonetheless and grateful to have you here. Okay, our numbers are continuing to rise up and go to the chat today. I want you to make sure that you see the chat as an extension of this community. Help us to understand maybe a little bit more about you, what sentiments are coming up for you as you engage in today's dialogue. We're so glad to have you here. And once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations VodCast. So as the screen says, let the conversations begin, and we're going to do just that. If you're just joining us, I am Dr. Nika White, and this is Intentional Conversations VodCast. It's where we intersect discussions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, along with leadership in business. And we bring forth great guest co-hosts who are wonderful practitioners in this space to help engage with us. And so we're so excited to have you here today. I want to let you know that our VodCast is also available in podcast capacity. And so for those who like to get their content in podcast, there's an additional way for this information to be spread and shared across other networks. One of the things we like to do at NWC is showcase some of the national observances that's taken place. And so I want to make sure that you all are aware that July is Disability Pride Month. Of course, we know that June was Pride Month. And so this month we're focused on Disability Pride Month. So let's make sure we're doing our part, not just during this month, but all throughout the year to support those who are marginalized and need the most support, because we know the systems of oppression are working really very much against them. And so we want to do our part. This is also a month where we like to highlight Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. There's nothing to be ashamed about. If you need some extra support, I will encourage you to seek that out. Let's do our part in helping to break the stigma and normalize being very intentional about taking care of our mental health, especially for those who are part of minority communities, because we know that a lot of the challenges through the systems of oppression are partly the reason for some of our mental health challenges. And so let's get that support that we need and continue to amplify this point. For those of you who've been following, you know for quite some time now that I continue to amplify my book number 3, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a Transformative Guide to Simplify DEI, available anywhere where you like to get your books. It's available in Kindle and audio, and of course in hardback, and that's in partnership with Forbes Books. I'm so grateful for those who continue to support, and if you haven't already, please consider writing an Amazon review. I would greatly appreciate it. As part of the Inclusion Uncomplicated launch, we also have several different specially curated learning experiences that takes a lot of the concepts that are presented in the book And it really helps individuals collectively to be able to delve deeper into some of those constructs. And so I invite you to reach out to us. My team is going to place into the chat a link where you can find more information about those experiences. But we would love to be in communication with you about unraveling the knot. Again, it's inclusion uncomplicated, inspired learning experience. I'm also super excited to let you know that my #1 LinkedIn course, first one, it has launched now. It is available. It is live. It's all about individual accountability around equity and inclusion. So I hope that you will check that out. I hope that you will see it as a great resource as you continue to deepen your knowledge and understanding of how to show up effectively for this work. Now, one of the things we often like to do at the start of the hour for our podcast is to let you know what you have to look forward to in the upcoming weeks by way of our guest co-host. And so on July 21st, next Friday, Aisha Joseph is going to be joining me, and we're going to be discussing decentering whiteness in the workplace, structural versus programmatic DEI efforts, and how anti-Blackness shows up in non-Black marginalized groups in the workforce. So join us on July 21st. And then the week after, wrapping up the month of July, we have Lillian Forsyth, and she's going to be discussing why DEI efforts at organizations should focus much less on hiring and much more on performance management, making inclusive behaviors part of every leader's performance review, and how to integrate DEI principles into all soft skills training. So I look forward to that conversation as well, and welcoming Lillian Forsyth. If you have a recommendation for a guest host that you think we need to align with and bring to this podcast community, we would like to hear from you. You can send a quick note to my colleague, Amora Carter, simply at amora@nikawhite.com. Let us know of your recommendations. We do take that very seriously because many of our guest co-hosts have actually come by way of recommendations from this community, and we're always grateful and appreciate that. Now, it's time for me to provide the formal introduction of our guest co-host today. And you all know that my routine is to read official bio, because I think it's important for all of us to know the accolades, the credentials, how in which our guest co-hosts show up to this conversation, and why they were selected and chosen to be a part of this podcast community. So I am happy to introduce my friend, Jessica Pharm. Jessica Pharm is a free-thinking HR professional with a background in employee relations, recruitment, training, and employment law, as well as policies. She believes in advocating for and assisting Black professionals as they struggle to navigate the complicated and stressful corporate America world. In 2020, she founded Blackness and the Workplace, whose mission is to empower Black professionals by providing resources, guidance, and support with a safe space to be able to speak truth to power about the uniqueness of our shared experiences and identities. Jessica aims to elevate the conversation around Black professionals by centering and valuing our experiences in a safe and protected space. She has joined us this morning from Seattle, so it's incredibly early for her. So I want you all to do me a favor and help her to feel incredibly welcomed for sharing her time, talent, and treasures with us today. Go cool those emojis, find those reactions, whatever kind of affirmations you can, place them into the chat, and help me to welcome Jessica Pharm as our guest co-host of today's Intentional Conversations. Welcome, Jessica. So glad you're here. Thank you so much for saying yes to our invitation and for getting up super early to spend time with us. We are really grateful. I want to give you a chance to greet this audience in your own way. Now, I will tell you that one of the things we often like to hear from our guest co-host, or maybe some additional tidbits of insight that perhaps we would not know from reading your bio or from maybe visiting your LinkedIn profile. So we can't wait to hear. Welcome, my friend.
Yes, well, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. I am recognizing a few of the names that are joining as people who do follow me. So that's always really great. I'm always very, very grateful that people respect the content and love following me and follow me in whatever it is I do. So thank you. And yes, I am on the West Coast and it is early, but it's all good. So very happy to be here. And one thing about me outside of the work that I do, or like a little fun fact, if you will, I don't know if it's a fun fact, but something I always like to share. I am a big nerd. I'm a Trekkie. I love Star Trek. Actually, I have a filter on, obviously, but in the background is just Star Trek wall to wall. But I didn't, I was like, I didn't put that out there. That's okay. I was just like, I put this filter. But yeah, that's one thing about me. I love Star Trek. I love what it represents, and that's my thing. So when I'm not doing this and advocating, I'm nerding out in my house. So that's one little thing about me.
I love that Star Trek is your jam. And listen, and
Yeah.
anytime, Jessica, if you want to change that background, you're is safe with us. We love people showing up authentic. And so you go for it if that feels appropriate. No, thank you. Thank you so very much. So you mentioned that some of the names are familiar to you. You do have an incredible following on LinkedIn, and your content is consistent. You are so authentic to who you are, what you stand for, and I really value that about you. I have shared with Jessica at the start of this conversation before we went live that I want her to co-create this experience with us. I want her to feel free to take the conversation wherever it leads and it feels most authentic. And so I want to start with a question kind of related to that. Your content is so clear and so consistent, and you have a large following. So obviously there are a ton of people that value that and that love the way that you show up and love that you are taking bold risk with how in which you are expressing your thoughts and things that quite honestly need to be said. I would imagine that there may be a subset of people that are also like, really, Jessica? Really? Again, you're going in really hard. Does it have to be this way all the time? And I just want to take a moment to kind of unpack that, because again, I love the level of sincerity and clarity where you stand in your truth and your power, and that's how you show up. So how do you navigate maybe some of the naysayers along with those who are really proud of how you show up?
So I will say, first of all, it has to be that way all the time. you know, and it took a long time for me to find my voice. You know, when I first started posting content on LinkedIn, it was very sanitized. It was always just about career advice, and that was it. And over time, I realized that just isn't the reality of my experiences as a Black woman in these spaces. And I also noticed that a lot of career advice that was being put out there was not geared towards the experiences and the realities of Black people. And I was doing a disservice by not being honest. And so that's the shift came, and I just started, still doing the advice and sharing, but through the context of a Black woman who has had to deal with that. And I said that I would do a service to everyone if I am posting regularly, if I'm speaking in my own voice, if I'm clear and consistent about what it is that I'm putting out there. And I never had a problem with people who didn't like it or didn't agree with it. You know, I had a lot of pushback when I started speaking about race and start, bringing in my experiences into the content. But I always say those people who rock with me and they understand that have been with me from the beginning, and everyone else, that's fine. It's not for everybody. And I don't try to tailor my content for everybody. I'm speaking in a very clear voice. I'm speaking to a very specific group of people. And that's not to say that other like white people, Asians, whoever, don't find value. I actually have a following that's, to my surprise, pretty diverse. But at the core of it, my focus has always been Black people. And I am very intentional. I don't say people of color. I don't say BIPOC, which I can't stand that word. I say Black people. And that's just the way it is.
I love that. Thank you. Keep showing up in your truth. Keep showing up as authentic as you do. I think that certainly people are trying to emulate that and model that, because we have a lot of people that are masking and covering. And so I appreciate that about you. So let's get into your career. Specifically, I want to talk about free thinking HR professional. That is language that you have used to kind of talk about how in which you show up into that profession. So in your own words, can you tell us, Jessica, what does that mean to you, that, free thinking HR professional, and why is it important for you to distinguish yourself in that way?
Yeah, when I say free thinking, honestly, is free thinking HR, free thinking Black woman. I'm a free thinking person. When I first got into my career, I'm very open about this, I had a very set way of seeing the world, because that was the way I was brought up, and that was the way that I thought things had to be. And so that was the way I presented myself. But again, over time, I realized that just because someone is saying that things have to be a certain way doesn't mean that they should be. And that it's okay to push against the status quo. It's okay to question things. It's okay to say, hey, look, this isn't right. Or, my experiences are going to be different from yours because I don't navigate these spaces the same way. And especially as a Black woman, I think that's very important to speak that out loud. And so when I say that I am a free thinking HR person, or HR or professional, whatever it may be, that's really what it means is that, you're saying it has to be this way, but I am very intentional about trying to think about things outside of the box, try to think about things from an equity point of view, just being very holistic and realistic in my thinking. And so that's what I mean in my context as what it means to be free thinking.
No, I appreciate that. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper because this approach has worked well for you. And I'd say that because I know that you have matriculated into upward, opportunities within your profession, within the workplace that you currently are affiliated with. And so I'm curious about, was that just from the beginning met with such great favor and people in your organization were saying, yes, we want this. We love the fact that you are very focused on a very specific audience in this broad context, kind of HR and DEI. And did you experience the opposite of that maybe prior to being in the organization that you are with now?
Yeah, so when I first started speaking and putting the content out there, like I said, it was very sanitized at first. And, I'm from Wisconsin. So if anyone's from the Midwest, there's a very different vibe and energy that is out there. I'm originally from Wisconsin. And, at first nobody cared because it was just career advice. You're just putting stuff out there, it's not harming anybody. But again, back in 2016, like I always tell people, I created Blackness in the Workplace because I was going through a lot and I felt like, why is this happening to me? And oftentimes I was the only Black woman. I still am in a lot of these spaces.
Yeah.
And so when I started bringing in the racial aspects and the social aspects that were happening to me, that's when, managers, especially white women that I reported into, let's just be real, that's when they had a problem. Because now I'm speaking to something that they're not comfortable with. And so then it was, hey, Jessica, I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile. Why are you talking about race? Or Jessica, all lives matter, trying to all lives matter my content. And I was very intentional. I said, no, I have to speak about what it's like when you are in the workplace and you're dealing with, we call them microaggressions, but there's nothing micro about an aggression, but
absolutely
dealing with, people asking me about my hair, me being passed up for opportunities, being overqualified for roles that I'm working in. And I'm working side by side with a white woman who has less qualifications, but she makes more money. I have to speak about, the things that I'm seeing and experiencing because those are having real impacts on my life. And I've always said that if you have a problem with my content, because all I speak about is equality at the core, it's all about treating people equally. If you have a problem with it, that says more about you than it does about me. So do you really want to be the one to have a problem with the content? And I realize that a lot of people don't want to be seen as racist. And you got a lot of white people who claim to be, liberals, and I'm very clear about how I feel about them. But you can't say that you are about supporting Black Lives Matter or whatever it is without supporting Black voices. And you need to be comfortable with those voices that are not always going to agree with you, that are going to call you out or call out the systems that support you or that you support. And when I moved, I decided, Wisconsin was not the place for me. If anyone's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The city is Milwaukee is very segregated. There was very little opportunities to move up and move around. You had managers and leaders who would go out and look on my profile or, website, and then, they didn't want to have anything to do with me. But I was okay with that because I'm like, this serves as a great filter because I don't want to work for anyone that's trying to mask my voice or, have an issue with what I say. I moved out to Seattle and I got the role because I emailed my manager at the time. I said, hey, I'm interested in this position, but before we talk, I need you to go on my LinkedIn. I need you to read my posts. I need you to go out on my website. I need you to know who I am, because if this is not going to work for you, then we don't need to talk. And the vibe out here in Seattle is a lot different, to be honest. And since moving out here, that has not been the issue. If anything, I have a lot of coworkers who follow me,
Yeah.
and who've been on my podcast, not been on, but listen to my podcast. So I just, you go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. And that's what I did.
Yes. Go where you are celebrated and not where you are tolerated. I love this. And I think you used the word filter a moment ago. And I love the boldness of naming, here's what I want you to do before we further this conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that so many of us, we take the opposite approach. We will mask, we will cover, we will clean stuff up or sanitize it, as the word that you used. And then we'll get the position. And then it's like, okay, well, what's happening now? I've always been this way. And so I think that the upfront conversations, that's really bold of you. And I'm grateful that you're modeling that for those who feel like they can't be as transparent. And so you referenced your podcast, Blackness and the Workplace. So tell us about that. What inspired it? I mean, you've already started to share a little bit of that journey, but what kind of content can people expect? And what's on the horizon for it in the future?
Yeah, so again, I started Blackness in the Workplace in 2020, which was, as we all know, a very special year. I'm using that term loosely. But I was inspired. I had been on a few other podcasts, and one of the things that I noticed was that there wasn't a podcast that was just about Black people talking to other Black people about work. That, essentially that's what it was. And so I started my podcast, and it has evolved. So initially I was interviewing a lot of Black professionals because I wanted to educate people about employment law. It was important for me to educate people about HR and, the different aspects of that. And then eventually over time, I was like, there's so much more that we can do. So I started doing a financial literacy series. I did a series on helping Black professionals, young Black professionals navigate, the workspace in ways that weren't given to me. So I really expanded it and wanted to make sure that I was targeting, Black people in all areas of their lives, not just work, because we're not just one thing, we are a monolith. And interviewing, and I wanted to be very democratic with my podcast. So I didn't necessarily need to interview like the biggest person. There's a lot of people who have really great content, really great experiences who can speak. So I just, if you have good information, if you're out here doing the work, I wanted to talk to you. And if you have resources, I wanted to talk to you. Another thing that's a big deal for me is that we don't just talk about the problems, we talk about the solutions. What solutions are you offering? What ways do we, address this issue instead of just talking about the problems all the time? So over time, the podcast developed into really just being a service the best way I could to those who listen. And,
awesome.
The future, sorry. I was going to say the future of the podcast, since moving out here in Seattle, my career has just blew up. And, life, as we all know, can be life in sometimes. So right now, I don't have any new episodes, but the podcast is still up there. I still get a lot of requests for the podcast. I definitely do want to go back to it sometime this year, hopefully, and do some more episodes. I really enjoyed it. It's just, a matter of time and just trying to get those pieces together.
Awesome. So again, it's called Blackness in the Workplace. And so still some really good content out there. And maybe when things kind of lighten up for you, you'll have some new content, some new guests. I love the fact that you don't necessarily just go after big names. It's just who are these ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things because they're living in their truth and they are really committed to their craft, their trade, their expertise, and providing that to the world in whatever capacity. And so I love that. We actually are going to place into the chat information so people can find your podcast, Blackness in the Workplace. So I want to talk about this strong self-advocacy role that you have and how that shows forth in your content and the way that you show up. I mean, you are firmly steeped into the belief that we need to center the experiences Black people, Black women. And so I want to understand, what are some of those coaching tips when you have folks to come to you to say, Jessica, here's my situation. I want to be as bold as you are. I want to be able to walk in my truth within the workplace and not have to mask or cover. What are some of those tips that you share with individuals when they approach you with that question?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I will say that it's taken years to get to this point. It's been a lot of trial and error, missteps, and all that good stuff to get to this point. And I understand that everyone may not feel as comfortable as me. They may not be in an environment where they can show up. I mean, I remember going to interviews where my hair was pressed in perm because we were raised to believe that something wrong was natural hair. And my father used to tell me, when you straighten your hair, when you go to the interview, when you get the job, you can show up in braids. And I used to do that. And then eventually I was like, this is why. I got white coworkers with blue hair. And why can't I show up with my natural hair? And now I'm showing up to interviews either in a fro, because I didn't get my hair braided before the interview, or in braids. And the people at my current job has never seen my natural hair. I just keep it in braids just for the sake of ease. But that's who I am. That's part of my aesthetic. And I don't feel like I should have to compromise that. I always tell people, if my coworkers can show up with tattoos all over their body, I should be able to show up with my hair being braided. And that mindset has taken years, but I will say that it's very important to know who you are, to set boundaries, to communicate those boundaries, and to make sure that you hold people accountable for when they're not respected. That goes a long way towards centering yourself, to showing up as your authentic self. One caveat to that, though, you have a lot of companies who will say that now. That's just kind of the buzzword, show up as your authentic self. Yeah. Right. But I push back against that, because it's like, are you creating safe spaces for your Black people, Black professionals, Black employees to show up as who they are? Yeah. But it takes time. And like I said, setting boundaries with yourself and making sure that you're communicating those boundaries and holding people accountable will help you in terms of maintaining your sanity in these spaces, and also having the interactions that you need, that you want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You are in a fortunate predicament, and Jessica, I'm sure you know that, because there are so many people, particularly Black women, who find themselves challenged by the work environment, and they don't feel like they can show up as themselves. They don't feel like they're valued. They're seeing that they're heard. And so I'm sure that some folks are listening on, and whether it's today or whether it's catching the replay or the podcast, and they are going to be inspired by what you're sharing, that there are some workplaces and some geographies and some situations where we can thrive and we can establish those boundaries without feeling like it's going to threaten our livelihood within that work environment. So how can someone genuinely, and I amplify that word, own their career and not leave their growth and development to their managers? Because a lot of our upward mobility opportunities, it has a lot to do with those manager, employee kind of relationships. And I believe that sometimes we feel like we are not empowered to also help shape that. So what can we do as individuals to help ensure that we aren't leaving, stifling our growth and our development within a workplace?
Yeah, so I will say that, the first thing you have to realize is that it is your career and that you own it, and that your manager or leader, I'll just use the word manager, doesn't own anything, so that is the first thing that you have to realize, and for me, like I said, this took years to understand, because I used to put my development and my growth into the hands of my manager, and that never served me well. But when you realize that it is your career, this is who you are, this is your brand, and you take that wherever you go, that right there creates that shift that you need. Now, I will say too, that having a good relationship with your manager doesn't mean you have to be buddies or anything like that, but having a good relationship with your manager goes a long way to helping you achieve your goals. So one of the first things that I always do is that when I'm linking up with a new manager is to have a conversation with him or her about who I am first as a person, because I'm a human being, and making sure that they understand that these are the things that are important to me, and that, as a Black woman navigating these spaces, oftentimes there is going to be challenges that I'm going to run into. Also talking with them about, what my career goals are. It's very
Yeah.
important to talk to them about, okay, these are the things that I'm looking to do. You're not asking permission. I just want to put that out there. We all are too grown for that. No one's asking anyone's permission. You're saying, look, in 2 years or 3 years, I'm looking for a promotion, or I want to move to this team in so many years. I want to go back to school, whatever it may be. You just want to make sure that you are having a clear talk with your manager about what your goals and expectations are. And then from that conversation, you want to make sure that you're getting a sense of what it is that your manager is able to do for you. They're able to provide resources and opportunities, whether it's putting you on projects or connecting you with someone. You want to get a sense of that early on. And if you have a manager who is open to that conversation and who is open to helping you, they may not have it, but they may know someone. If they're willing to help you develop you, then that's what you want, right? But oftentimes I had this prior to, moving out here, is that managers who would get very intimidated when you say what you're looking for and what your expectations are, managers who would try to hold you back, managers that you have to pull teeth from essentially to get them to talk to you. Those are red flags. And so when you see that, that's when you need to start making decisions on, do I need to be here? And honestly, the answer is no. A good manager is not intimidated. I had one manager tell me that a sign of a good manager is if his employees sort of leave the nest and they move on to bigger and better things, because, they were supported in doing that. So you want to be very assertive and clear about what it is that you want.
I believe that wholeheartedly. When you think about what is my success as a leader, what is my success as a manager, is to develop your people to where they are kind of leaving the nest, to use your language. And so if someone is in a position that no longer serves them because maybe maybe they've tried some of these practical strategies and tactics that you just shared, and they are not being met with the support from their manager or their leader, one solution would be to leave. One solution would be to try to stay and tolerate it. But both of those come with some consequences, some pros and some cons. And so what normally do you share with someone when they are seeking advice around such a situation?
So, I always tell people, at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for you. Not everyone can jump ship. Not everyone can quit a job. Everyone's situation is different. So I want to always be respectful of the situations that folks are in. However, I always tell people you should always be networking. You should always be interviewing. You should always keep your eyes open for your next opportunity, even if you are in a role that's giving you everything that you need. You just always want to just keep an eye out. You don't want to stay anywhere in any position that's no longer serving you. You want to be able to get out of that as soon as possible, because all that's going to do is hold you back. I've been in positions where I wasn't getting on with the manager, or I felt like, hey, I actually can do this job better than the manager. And I've never been afraid to communicate to my leaders, these are the things that I'm looking for. And then if I'm not getting that, then I have to move on, because a job is a two-way street. You're paying me to do the job, but at the same time, if this is no longer serving me, I gotta go. And you always want to have an exit strategy planned out. You always want to just know, okay, if this role doesn't work out, what are my other options? And try to give yourself as many options as possible, but don't feel like you have to stay longer than you need to in a role or a company or under managers that's no longer serving you, because you do have options.
We do have options. No, that's great. You referenced something a moment ago as we were talking about the success of a leader is having people falling under their report who are able to kind of get out of the nest and have all these other opportunities. And there is a phenomenon out there that relates to minority professionals called pet to threat. Right. And so if this community is not familiar with it, I encourage someone on my team to just do a quick search and maybe place an article for reference into the chat. But I bring that up because I do believe that oftentimes that is the challenge, particularly Black women are faced with in organizations. So from your vantage point, Jessica, has there ever been a time that you, or maybe a colleague that you know of, maybe that you've been in a community with or coaching and supporting, surpassed their manager in like career hierarchy. How did you or that colleague navigate that? What does that look like for someone who may find themselves in that predicament? And I would imagine that if that happens, it's probably not necessarily because the manager has been able to provide that open door. I mean, maybe so, but again, we know the challenges oftentimes that exist within the workplace, particularly around Black women.
Yeah, so I actually interviewed a while back on my podcast. Her name is Erica Stallings, and she wrote an article about the pet the threat. And I read it and I was just so inspired by it. And it was a graphic that was trending on LinkedIn about the pet the threat, the path of the woman of color in the workplace and at her exit. And I mean, those things spoke to me so much. And I have experienced that. So you come into an organization and things are good for a while, you know what I'm saying? Like everything is working out and you're getting in, you're learning your role, you're learning the people. But over time, as what happens is that you're starting to notice some issues, you're noticing that you're being treated different, or you're not getting what you need, and you start to bring those issues up. Oftentimes I tell people, and this is true, white mediocrity in the workplace is rampant. And so all the Black women that I've interviewed on my podcast, all the Black women, professional Black women that I know, and even Black men, oftentimes are overqualified for the roles that they get. And the reason for that is because we are not given grace. So what I mean by that is that I've seen white people get hired for positions where they're not qualified for, because, hey, we'll pour into them, we'll support them, we'll nurture them, we'll let them grow, and that's good. But Black people aren't given that. So as a consequence, you'll have Black women who have all these degrees and have a ton of experience working side by side with white colleagues or what have you, who don't even measure up. And so when you go into these spaces, very quickly, they realize that you have more education, you have more experience than they do, and they get threatened by that. And that's where that threat comes in. Now you're asserting yourself, you're saying, hey, this isn't right, and you're able to back it up with receipts, and they don't like that. And so then you start finding yourself tripping into what I call corporate minefields. And that's what was happening to me. People were kind of, picking out my tone. People say, well, your tone is a little off-putting, whether it's because I'm direct or in my emails, I'm direct, whatever it may be. It starts getting petty. You start finding the hurdles getting bigger and bigger. And eventually you leave. You either leave voluntarily or you find yourself being fired or laid off or whatever it may be. But that pet to threat reality is real. And I've experienced that quite a bit, especially when I was working under white women who did not have the same level of experience as I do. And because they were threatened and they were put off by that. A few years ago, I was going for my PHR certification, Professional Human Resources certification. And that's a very hard cert to get, if you don't know. And my coworker, a white woman, she was also going for that certification. And more people failed on their first time on this cert. Yeah. They passed. And she kept talking about how hard it was for her to get it, because she took it a few times and she had failed. And I took it the first time I passed it. I didn't think it was as hard as people made it out to be. But even with that and other things that I had done, I was still running behind her because she was making more money, she was given more opportunities. And when she realized that I had a lot more experience than her, she was put off by that. I remember she wanted to be my mentor. And I'm like, no. She was like, I want to mentor you. I was like, I don't want to be mentored by you. I have more education than you. I have more experience. And I told her that. As I tend to be very straightforward. Like, no, I don't want you mentoring me. Why? Let me mentor you. So they get very threatened by that because of their sense of superiority. And that is what trips up a lot of Black people in the workplace.
Thank you.
Be
Thank you for
real.
making it plain. No, that's again, that realness is, I think is so refreshing. So thank you so much. So I just want to let the audience know that we're going to shift momentarily to take your questions, your commentary, and you can let us know that you're willing to do that by using the raise hand feature in Zoom. And that will indicate to me that you're willing for me to call upon you, to invite you to unmute yourself. We'll spotlight you and let you share your question or comment. Or if you have a question and you just want to present it by placing it into the chat, we'll make sure we bring that to the conversation as well. I'm going to ask one more question just to give you time to percolate maybe on what curiosities are coming up for you that you want to present to Jessica. I want to stay here a little bit on the corporate minefields because you did reference and you gave us great example, but I want you to maybe think about some other corporate minefields that we have to be aware of and give us some additional tips for how to navigate them.
Yeah, so I talked about the tone in the email and, some of the petty stuff. I think another minefield that catches a lot of us, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in terms of grace. And so in the workplace, there is a fear that a lot of us have because of making mistakes, making mistakes at work.
Yeah.
Mistakes happen, and mistakes are a great way for you to learn and grow from. I have experienced this, and I've seen this more times than I care to count, but I've seen my white coworkers make mistakes, like terrible mistakes, mistakes that's costing the company a ton of money. But, they're given that grace, hey, they made a mistake. We'll train, we'll course correct, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. They're given opportunities to make mistakes and to grow from them, to learn, and then to level up. Oftentimes as Black people, we're not given that. We're not hired. I posted this before. Well, white people are hired based on potential and Black people are hired based on experience, and therein lies the problem. So again, white people are often hired and their qualifications aren't really, it's all right, but they're given resources to develop and grow. Whereas we are not, we're expected to come in and already know this. And so the minefield happens where we see that. We say, okay, well, they was given an opportunity to make a mistake. I can't do that. And so it's a real fear of taking on projects or taking on new challenges, because if we mess up, are we going to be given that grace? Are we going to be allowed to make that mistake, learn from it, course correct, and move on? Or are we going to get demoted? Or are we going to get fired? Are we going to be hit with the stigma and never given another opportunity again? And those things happen. And so you have a lot of us who are just like, I don't want to take on anything new, and that stunts us because you don't grow in that way. So that's a huge minefield that catches many of us out there, because it's real and it's so rampant throughout the workplace. And it's a lot of and I was at a leader conference. I did a leadership program a few months ago, and there was a gentleman that was speaking about his career journey, and he was a white man, and he was talking about all the mistakes that he had made. And he was at one point on the verge of being fired because his manager was like, "You're not getting this role. You're not getting it. You're not working out." And he learned from that. And I was thinking, well, I know I wouldn't be given the courtesy of a manager coming to me and saying, "Hey, Justin, you're struggling here. You're on the verge of being let go. Let's course correct. Let's develop you. Let's grow." No. Mm-hmm. I would have been pulled into the office and been like, "You're fired." Yeah. And just a quick pivot into this really quick. I did a series on my podcast about PIPs, performance improvement plans, which if you ever get put on, you pretty much have lost your job. And so I interviewed this woman who wrote an article about PIPs and the threat to Black professionals, and how a lot of Black people in the workplace, they get put on PIPs really quick when companies want to let them go. And when I opened it up and started interviewing a lot of different Black people, I had a lot of people from all over wanting to be on the podcast, but you can't do everybody. But the common theme when I was talking to all of them was that their manager would never develop them, never have like a one-on-one meeting, never like a development meeting, wouldn't do anything with them. And then as soon as they make a mistake or is perceived to have made a mistake, the manager is very quick to want to let them go. So that is a big minefield. That's a huge issue that we deal with.
Those are two great examples. I am not a fan of PIPs for that very
Neither.
reason as
Yeah.
well. I'm not a fan. And I realize that there's a lot of folks from a legal compliance perspective will lead you to always have that as your solution. But I feel like it hurts, especially a lot of minority professionals in the
Yeah.
workplace. And so thank you for bringing that to the conversation. So we do have a hand raised, Renita Crawford. Thank you for joining us, Renita. I want to acknowledge you and give you a chance to unmute yourself and to share with the audience.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies, for this invaluable advice. It's excellent. I have a comment and then a question. I don't think we will see significant change in our lifetimes in the workplace. So I've learned how to be a chameleon. It's not ideal, but I consider it an art. And I also teach and tell my daughters the obstacles that they will face throughout their career, but I have equipped them with tangible advice to maneuver and play this power game without detection. That is how I have made career leaps. But imagine, I have people say, oh, Renita, you're so successful. And I say, but imagine where I would be if I had not been subjected to racism and discrimination in the workplace. So, and one book I've recommended to my daughters is The 48 Laws of Power. But I wondered, or my question is, do you recommend playing that kind of game? Because I do think there are so many landmines. And I have throughout my careers been the only one in the C-suite, the only one in the room. But I think it's because I've figured out how to navigate those landmines. So is that something you recommend? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Renita, before Jessica answers that question, I want to make sure this audience captures the book that you referenced. I think I heard you say 48 Laws of Power.
Yes, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene.
Okay, great. We're going to place that into the chat, Jessica.
Okay, that's a very good question. And I think the answer is very complicated. So go with me on this journey. So this is how I feel. I feel like I have had to, for the sake of peace, sometimes be that chameleon in certain spaces, because I'm trying to get paid, I'm trying to do what I got to do. So I understand that. And I also understand that everybody doesn't have the luxury of being at a company or a manager who has been as open as mine and to who I am and all that good stuff. So I get that. So I totally understand that. And I've also said before, like, I really don't like the idea that companies have been pushing the, bring your whole self to work. I think they're, off the back of the George Floyd, I think there was this weird attempt that companies had to try to be inclusive, but they went about it the wrong way. You can't ask Black people to come and bring their whole selves into a workplace that you have not provided safety for. And even to this day, I feel like there's still things that I don't say or that I don't do in the workplace just because I feel like there should be a balance. I don't have a problem with people who say, this is my professional life and this is my personal life. And, the way I talk or act, I'm not going to, because I understand that because that is still a barrier that I maintain. So it is hard. It is tricky. It's just a complicated question, and you have to kind of look at your own experiences and kind of see what you need to do to get to where you are, because that's what I did. When I was living in Wisconsin, I was very unhappy because I felt like, for me anyway, I was compromising too much of myself in these spaces that weren't doing anything for me. I was being asked to bite my tongue when I was dealing with somebody who was being racist to me. I had a manager who had a lot of racial animosity towards me. And I'm like, why am I still here? These spaces aren't nurturing for me. And so I left. And I know that that's a privilege that everybody doesn't get to have. Everybody just can't pack up and leave. I'm single, I don't have any kids. So I was like, I'm bouncing, I'm out. So, and I moved to a space where I felt like I was much more open. I could be much more open about who I am and how I navigate. So for me, it's such a loaded question because it really depends on, your situation and what you're trying to do and where you are. It just depends on so many different factors.
I agree, Jessica. That is a great question, but it is very loaded, very, very complex. There's not a one size universal answer. And Renita, I do appreciate you bringing that to the conversation. I will add that I also think that it's very circumstantial, it's very situational. It depends on so many different dynamics, the power dynamics. It depends on what's like the historical kind of relational interactions with the people that are involved. Do you already have like a pretty solid bank account of deposits that have been built up to where if this is a risk that you're willing to take and it's going to be a withdrawal, that it won't, really damage, or consequences that you can't undo? It's so much. And so, but it's definitely something that I encourage all of us to begin to think about. What is our own individual appetite for when we find ourselves against the wall in those tough situations? How far are we willing to go? We need to now position ourselves to have tools and resources in our toolbox so that if we are met with these situations, we aren't caught off guard. And so I love the fact that you brought a resource, Renita. And I invite this community that if we think about this broad, complicated question, if there's certain things or resources that come up for you, please place them in the chat for the benefit of this larger community. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions at this time? If so, again, use the raise hand feature. Let us know so we can hot spotlight you and let you to present your question or comments. I'm not seeing any immediately right now, so I'm going to go to my next question while you continue to think on, again, those curiosities that could be coming up. So you are in HR, Jessica, and I'm sure you are keenly aware of the big conversation right now that's happening around the intersection of HR and DEI, how they should play in the sandbox together, how they shouldn't even be in the sandbox, there's so many criticisms and just, opinions that are surfacing. And I would just love to hear from you as to what are your thoughts on how this body of work should be integrated or should maybe have its own separate path as well. And Kwabena, I see your hand. I'm going to come to you next.
Yeah, so it's funny because a lot of people say that I'm a DEI professional and I'm not. I don't work in DEI. I work in HR, and I have intentionally stayed away from corporate DEI. I am part of what we call BRG's employee resource groups or what have you, but it's not my career for many reasons. I don't really believe a lot of companies are true to the mission of DEI, and you're looking at now a lot of DEI professionals being laid off now that George Floyd, all that's calmed down. And it's always to me just kind of this weird game, and I just have never been willing to be a part of it. I will say that I don't believe that DEI should report to HR because HR can be very problematic and very toxic. And a lot of what I talk about are some of the issues that HR has when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion. HR, for those, just for clarity, I just want people to understand that HR exists to protect the company, to make sure that the company is okay. That doesn't align with the work that DEI does. So DEI and HR can be parallel to some extent, but DEI should not be reporting into HR. They really shouldn't touch each other in that way. Oftentimes when people have issues, I've had people say, I have a problem and I need to talk to HR. I always tell people, HR is there to protect the company. And that may or may not include protecting you. It just depends on the situation. So just be careful. But no, DEI needs to exist very separately from HR. Work together, be parallel, but no way should they report into each other. HR is just too toxic.
You said it, not me, but I absolutely agree. We've talked about this several times on this show. And so thank you so much. Okay, Kwabena, welcome. Good to see you, my friend. What is your question or comment?
Likewise. Good morning, everybody. Really, thank you for having yet another fantastic guest, Dr. Nika. So first, Jessica, representing from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So glad to see you go, but unfortunately, in a great state. That being said, as you talk about experiences in the workplace and Blackness in the workplace, oftentimes, as you talked about that, the Black experience is multifaceted. So many different ways to be Black. Can you talk about a time when you've seen where Black professionals were being microaggressed and subject to biases, stereotypes, and all those things, like other Black professionals. More specifically, how you have either as an HR professional who, to your point, you're not in DNI, which I think, side note, the most evolved DNI programming is going to put people you in the business, not just in the tech side. But if you can share how you've seen people manage those relationships, manage those situations when they're being microaggressed and challenged by a person, their own cultural.
So the question was, is my experience as a Black woman dealing with microaggressions or other messy situations from other Black people. So personally, I've never experienced that because oftentimes I was the only one in the spaces that I were in, and the other Black women who worked at my company, like for example, I was working on the corporate side of things. So in Wisconsin, we have a lot of manufacturing, as you know, and so other Black women that were at my company was working on the production floor, so they couldn't be in a position to really do anything. So that has not been my personal experience, but I know that has been the experience of other Black women and Black men, unfortunately. And I think a lot of it stems to the idea that there can be quote unquote only one. And so when other Black people come into these spaces, you have other Black folks who've been in these roles for a long time, and they feel threatened, or they feel like, if you do something, you're gonna make me look bad. You know what I'm saying? Like that goes what we call representation politics. And so it creates an even more complicated, even more messier situation. It is unfortunate, but it is a reality. But for me, I haven't seen that, but I know that from like a few people that I've talked to, they got it a lot from older Black people, especially older Black women, who mindset about the workplace may be very different and maybe very traditional. And so how do you navigate that is difficult, because it hurts. It hurts. To me, it hurts even more when it comes from your own. When someone is telling you, when it's someone who looks like you, who's trying to hold you back or trying to get in your way of progress because they feel like I can't let this job go, or, I can't have you taking my spot. And what people don't understand is, one, there's room for everybody. And two, you are liable to get fired and let go just as fast as anybody else. You're not special just because you buddy with your manager. I knew a woman like that at a former company that I worked at. A Black woman who thought that she was special because she was friends with some of the folks in HR. And when time came, she was let go just as much as anybody else. So, it's an unfortunate reality. We get it from all sides.
Yeah, it's a scarcity mindset. I agree with everything that you said. Representation politics is real. Thank you, Pavana, for your question. I want to try to sneak one more in, and Nika Cruz has been patiently waiting with her hand up. And so, Nika, thanks for joining us for today. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I'm going to add you to the spotlight if you'd like. Well, actually, I don't see that your camera's on, so I'm going to respect that you may not want to be spotlighted, but certainly unmute yourself and share.
Hello, thank you so much, Jessica. I love you. I just want to quickly talk about a situation at my last company. We were at an all hands meeting, and a white woman who I outranked admitted in front of our department that she felt threatened by me. And this was a woman over like the course of 5 months who had been extremely rude and unprofessional to me. And I had brought it to the attention of my manager and even the CEO, because I had a biweekly meeting with him. And at the all hands, after she said it, instead of like validating my feelings, what happened was she got praise and recognition for being transparent. And I was really angry, but it was a work event and I was presenting and I was over a department. So I wanted to know any advice you have about how I could have appropriately addressed that situation, because I know it won't be the last time. What was a way that I could have responded? Because I've really been feeling bad about the fact that I remained silent, even though I was kind of fuming inside. So open to any kind of advice.
So I just they stay pressed. I mean, they do. They stay pressed. They stay wanting to be offended. It's really irritating because I myself have dealt with that, where I had a coworker, a white woman, who felt like I was threatening her because I was very direct with her about something that had happened. And she reported me to our manager, and manager brought me in, and I explained what happened. It's so hard to even answer that. Sometimes you have to kind of look at the situation, kind of determine, what battles you want to fight. But if someone is saying at work that they feel threatened by you, she's saying that intentionally with the hopes of you getting either, getting punished some way, even being let go. So I definitely would talk to my manager about that, bring her in and ask, what ways do you feel threatened? Like, why do you feel threatened? And have her explain that, because you just can't say that I feel threatened without being able to explain that, without being able to even prove that, and listen to what she's saying. And oftentimes when it comes to Black women, or just, Black people, we get accused of being, threatening just because we're either louder or we're more direct, or even because they don't like the idea that you are above them or that you're telling them to do something because of their sense of superiority. So I definitely will have a conversation. Make sure you document it. That's a whole nother conversation, but make sure you document your interactions with this woman moving forward, so that if it ever escalates, you have proof of how you've been interacting and talking to her.
That's so good. Thank you so much, Nika, for your question. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being here. I'm going to say this. A white woman stating to other leaders or other peers in an organization that she is feeling threatened by a Black woman, to me, is akin to a white woman calling the police on a Black man.
That's the corporate version of it.
And I'm just going to end on that. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you to this community. I hope that you all have enjoyed this conversation and that you will join us again in future weeks for Intentional Conversations VodCast. Thank you all.
Thank you.